I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hope you had yourself a great week. I definitely did. I was down in Orlando, Florida for a few days. Not on holidays. I wasn't there to see Disney World or go on any rides or take in any shows. I was there for CattleCon 2024, which is the NCBA meeting. One of the really top meetings of the year when it comes to the cattle industry. Delegates from across the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, all in one location. There's obviously a huge trade show, as well as a lot of committee meetings and conversations that do happen. And this year we were down in Orlando, and it was really a lot of fun. We got a lot of coverage at RealAgriculture.com. One of those interviews that I did do while I was down in Orlando was with Dennis Laycraft. He is Executive Vice President with the Canadian Cattle Association. There was a trilateral meeting that happened between the three countries that are in the USMCA CUSMA agreement, and we'll hit on that with Dennis in a little bit. We're also going to hear a bit of a weather forecast from Matt Makens of Makens Weather. He's going to talk about what can we expect in Western Canada when it comes to the spring forecast. And you know what? We heard him about a month to 6 weeks ago, and it wasn't a good story. I gotta give you a bit of a sneak peek. He may be changing his tune, and in a good way. Then we're gonna get a grasshopper forecast for Saskatchewan from James Tansey, Dr. James Tansey, I should say, from the Government of Saskatchewan. He's the entomologist there. That's not so good. Such good news. And then we're gonna hear from Divyesh Patel with Ground Truth Ag on automated grain grading, an interview that Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture did when he was at Manitoba Ag Days. If you have any feedback on today's program on RealAg on the Weekend, you can always send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find Real Agriculture across all the social media platforms, or you're more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's dig in here with Dennis Laycraft, Executive VP with the CCA, talking about that trilateral meeting that took place this week at the CattleCon convention in Orlando, Florida. And we start off by talking about Dennis's, he provided information to the OMB in the U.S., talking about the Product of USA label, that it's in its final rule stage. Last stage is the OMB, and CCA provided their side of the story. That's where Dennis and I started.
Right now, it's at the Office of Management and Budget. That's sort of the last step. They review it. We have a similar process in Canada before it goes back to the agency, which in this case is USDA and FSIS. And so it's sort of the last step. Now, they can say you need to go back and do more. You didn't necessarily follow the administrative procedures that are required, which is one of the arguments we're making. They didn't put some of the options they had actually indicated just a year earlier into the discussion, for instance, slaughter conveying origin. Right now, they've got the most prescriptive, restrictive definition in the world with the born, raised, slaughtered, and processed to qualify for the U.S. product. And in an integrated North American market, that has all kinds of implications, including when we start exporting products, because you have to put product of Canada or product of USA on your product when you export it. So there's going to be different definitions if it's going for export than if it's going to be used domestically. How do packers manage something like that? So,
is the big concerns segregation at the plant, or what are some of the consequences that you are making sure you get the message across?
Yeah, and, it's not the voluntary or the labeling, it's how prescriptive. And even their own procurement programs are now saying, now have to follow this new definition. So it's all about, is it going to lead to segregation and discrimination against imported cattle, which was what we went to the WTO with the MCOOL case about.
Now, some, though, would argue that's the whole point. I hope that it's restrictive to cattle coming from Mexico and from Canada, which then is a very circular discussion that leads us back to sort of where the WTO challenge was.
Yeah, there's. I think the majority of producers in the U.S. actually think bigger than that. Exports are really important to them. The integrated North American. There's some that are more want to obstruct trade, but really there's been such beneficial movement in. It's not just feed; it's feeder cattle, it's slaughter cattle. When we're dealing with climate change and some of the droughts, cattle have moved from there. So we have a place for them to move instead of leaving the herd, for one thing. Or, we're able to maintain a higher feeding capacity in areas that are. We're probably going to experience that in Western Canada, where we're going to have to import more feeder cattle from the United States for a number of years. And that's actually going to benefit cow-calf producers in the U.S. because you're going to have a very active bidder on their market. So I think when people look at it more objectively, there's more benefits from an integrated market than there are ever losses in it.
I think one of the things that sometimes goes unmentioned is that integration is throughout the chain. Like, it's not like it's like, okay, well, we really are only integrated at this one point in the system. Whether it's feeder cattle, it's culled cows, or it's stockers going both directions, or it's finished cattle, or it's beef that's in a box. Canada's a substantial buyer of U.S. box beef. So, the integration is very, very. It's throughout the chain, and I think that's something that some people miss sometimes.
It even starts genetically. There's cattle moving back and forth. I mean, I know people who were down at the Denver Stock Show with a truckload of cattle, and once you get into cow-calf, there are people that own operations on both sides of the border. You're seeing Dr. Kijim being inducted into their Cattle Feeding Hall of Fame. Again, recognizing, and this integration dates back, almost a century in some cases. And, we're seeing Eastern Canada now importing more and more feeder cattle from areas like Virginia. So it just stretches in a way that makes North America more competitive. And we have a great opportunity in Asia. They want grain-fed, high-quality beef. And we're the best in the world at doing that.
Speaking of Asia, any updates on, it's kind of been very quiet, China. I was talking to Don Close from Terrain earlier, and we were talking about how the U.S. has had some volatile struggles when it comes to exports of beef into China. What's our status from a Canadian perspective at this point?
There's really no change. We just, you hear that, there's no reason they're closed. Certainly, they lifted the COVID restrictions, but didn't lift the suspension that they had, which never should have been there in the first place. With an atypical case of BSE, your investigation ceases the minute you determine it's atypical. Well, we'll just change their rules so you don't even need to report it till your annual reporting. So, it really, until they just get the political will to move, it just seems it's stuck where it is right now. And, that could change any day, but it might not for a long time, too.
You mentioned Kijim. He's being inducted into the U.S. Cattle Feeding Hall of Fame. And there's going to be a reception tonight that I'm going to attend as well. That's being put on to recognize that achievement. As a Canadian who has fed a substantial amount of cattle in Canada, big obviously a large player in the U.S. as well. This is a very significant award. I think it's something that really needs to be people need to think about and recognize the fact that a Canadian is going to be inducted into the U.S. Cattle Feeding Hall of Fame. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just his remarkable career, how significant feedlot animal health became, not just in Canada and the U.S., but around the world. And, of course, he's become one of the most significant cattle feeders in the world. So, I've always said as Canadians, we can be as good or better than anybody in the world. And, he's clearly a great example of that.
I'm going to tell him that tonight at the reception, but I remember he would frequently send me emails when I would write something, and I would, whether he agreed or disagreed, I was just like, Jim's emailing me. He's actually reading what I'm saying. So he's one of the smartest guys in this business. There's just no question about it. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us here. All the best to you at NCBA, or CattleCon 2024 as they call it, and thanks so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and it should be a great week down here.
That was Dennis Laycraft, Executive VP with the CCA. You can hear my entire conversation with Dennis at RealAgriculture.com. Also, we've got a ton of interviews being posted on RealAgriculture.com from the conference, talking about the size of the cow herd, talking about the markets, talking about the weather, all of that and more. And speaking of the weather, we're going to hear from Matt Makens of Makens Weather. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. We're going to get into the weather forecast, but first I want to tell you about FP Genetics. Innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region. Visit fpgenetics.ca to learn more. Down at the Cattle Convention, I had a chance to catch up with Matt Makens of Makens Weather. He's based in Colorado. And we talked about what can we expect from the Western Canadian prairies this spring. Has anything changed? Is there an opportunity for some moisture? Here's what Matt had to say.
It's in some cases it's roughly the same, just sped ahead by a couple of weeks. Because in the last discussion we talked about, we get periods of moisture, especially BC, and the mountains can at times if BC doesn't steal it all.
Yeah.
But the transition we chatted about going back to La Nina, it's happening. It's happening quick. We're losing all that El Nino momentum, if you will. So the transitional period is actually can be a good period for the prairies, getting into the mountains. Not necessarily east. There's a minimal impact there, but by that transition, I mean the faster we get into the La Nina, you're almost reversing the precip pattern. So we're going to catch it on that swing as it comes back up to the north. So late spring, early summer, I see hopeful signs of getting some water on a lot of the prairies. Whereas I believe the last time we chatted, it was kind of a little bit maybe later in the summer, so not as well timed. But as long as the speed of this transition occurs as it looks like it will today, we're going to catch some of that water swinging up out of the States, get it into kind of the west, May, June-ish.
Okay, May better. Like I was going to say, pre-June 1st, I think is ideal. A lot of ranchers I talk to, they'll say, okay, what did Matt say? Because if we get a lot of rainfall, and it happens in July, August, we're past the window. Right? We need grass earlier in the season, and because it gets so hot, once we get into July, we need that rain in June. So you're telling me there is a chance?
Yeah, like as you look progressively through May into early June, there's a pretty pronounced odds in favor of wetness. And I'm not like, not everybody's getting covered in rain, but the odds, the frequency of rain dramatically increases in that period. So, bottom line for everybody, your odds are much better in May and early June. I mean, the wet season is kind of the summer, and that's misleading because, maybe it's the wet season, but for a lot of us in this industry, I don't care about the wet season. I care about the first day of the wet season. It better be wet already to help things out for the rest of the year.
Between now and planting time, what can we expect on the western half? because it's been interesting. It's been volatile, right? We went from, let's just talk Fahrenheit for a second. We went from minus 50 in Montana and Alberta, right? Then 10 days later, we're talking 55 degrees, 60 degrees, and kids are playing baseball outside. What's happening?
When we start to bottle up cold around the pole and Siberia, this happens throughout October, snow is falling over, you're bottling up that cold. And once you hit January, February, March, April, all you need is a connection to that cold. Grab it and bring it our way. Because we don't have snowpack. It's pretty brown in a lot of places. So we're not trapping the cold here, so we have to send it in. So in early January, there was kind of a weakening of the pole, if you will, the winds up there, and that allowed some of that cold air to kind of seep our way. We may see that again tail end of February, early March. The probability kind of looks like it's a lesser impact of cold than what we had in January, but potentially another cold spell is what I'm getting at. And with that, you would hope there'd be some moisture, but the cold stuff is really dry air. So once we get past February, get into March, that's when we're going to see those odds of the potential of grabbing this cold really start to drop off. Like it's got to happen next month, 6 weeks or so, for that true cold to move in.
Okay, between now and planting, spring, North America, what are the triggers, the points we're looking for here to give us an indication what this is going to look like?
Early season forages, oats, wheat, whatever it may be, grasses look good. Early hay, a couple first cuttings should be good. You look at corn, and you're probably going to hear the opposite side. You're going to hear, we're pretty dry right now. We're in a drought. We're trying to start this year's corn in a drought. We've got to get the water coming. And then it's going to come to summer, and we're going to be talking about the timing of rainfall. It's like, well, we're starting to get the rains, but they got to be well timed for us.
We're going to try to kill this corn crop again, aren't we?
And then late in the season, we'll start getting more plentiful moisture coming in, and the people are going to say, well, I got to cut it now, so we can turn the rain off. So bottom line is wet in the prairies early on, dry late in the year, and the opposite for corn. Kind of dry early and wetter as the season goes on.
That was Matt Makens of Makens Weather out of Colorado, talking about the weather forecast for the Western Canadian prairies. So this is sounding better, because like I mentioned, when I had talked to Matt like 6 weeks ago, it wasn't looking very good. It was not. Okay? So it's not ideal, because we could have a bit of a warm, dry spring, but there is an opportunity to get some moisture in that June time frame. The question is, do we have enough moisture off the beginning, off the start of the year, to get this crop out of the ground? This is the key. So it sounds like for the most part, the Western Canadian prairies are going to be light on moisture hit in the springtime, but just a little bit will help, right? And if we can be rescued by June moisture, I think that's a lot better story and a lot better prognosis than we were getting, 2-3 months ago. So I'm going to take the positive here. I'm going to take the fact that we're getting better. Okay. Now, if that rain doesn't come to the back end of July, well, too late. Exactly. I understand that. So obviously from a pasture perspective and from a crop perspective, all eyes right now are big time on what Mother Nature is going to do when it comes to sorting out this weather. Okay, when we come back here on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to dig in a little bit on grasshoppers. We're talking to Dr. James Tansey. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg on the weekend. Of course, it is on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at co-op.crs/farm. Okay, now, at Manitoba Ag Days that happened back in January, Calvin Hepner of Real Agriculture was on location there. And he had a conversation with Ground Truth Ag about automated grain grading. What does this look like? He chatted with Ground Truth Ag's Divyesh Patel about some of their technology.
So we're here showing off our reference automated grain grading system. It's a benchtop version of our automated grain grading platform. We are starting with the benchtop version. Eventually we'll have the unit on combines as well, and potentially on augers throughout the supply chain. But this first unit does all of the visual grading characteristics of Canadian Western Red Spring wheat. So right now it does about 50 grading factors that are defined by the Canadian Grain Commission: frost, mildew, sprouted grains, severe sprouts, all the impurities like sclerotinia, ergot, and all of those things. Because our rationale is that in order to really understand the grade of your grain, you need to any automated system needs to be able to do every characteristic, because any one of those characteristics can downgrade your grade.
Okay. So this is using a camera basically to replace that subjectivity of a human eye?
That's exactly right, yeah. So we use just a standard computer vision camera, and then we've built our own machine vision detection models that identify all these characteristics. And then there's some complex math that then takes that detection and converts it into a prediction. So if you're familiar with the grading process, a lot of these things are a percentage of weight. So if you're looking for start grass green kernels, you actually have to weigh the kernels, and that's a little difficult to do when we're just taking an image of it. So we have to come up with our own way of making sure that that image translates to the percentage that's required to actually do the grade.
Okay. Would you put this in the category of AI?
Yes, it is in the general category of AI. We don't really use that term very often because I don't think a lot of people care if it's what makes it work. It's more that it does work, and that's the most important part for us. Okay. I will say though that the just on the technology side, the fact that machine learning and artificial intelligence has advanced to the point that it is today is what makes our product possible. There's been similar products tried like this through the 90s and even more recently than that. But I would say, even about 5 years ago, the base technology that we used to build our product wouldn't have been possible.
Okay. So we, of course, have heard stories from farmers of taking grain to two different elevators, being graded by two different people, and coming from the same field, the same bin kind of thing, and grading differently. What kind of variability is there in this relative to what we might see from a human standard grading, the type of grading we've done until now?
Yeah, that's a really difficult comparison to do because, we know our computer vision models have very high precision and recall as the measurements. Like, we know that if the factor that we're looking for is in that sample, we're more than 90% likely to identify it. And when we identify an impurity, we're more than 90% likely to get it correct. But understanding what the baseline of a human is not as easily characterized. But I will say that, when we run the same sample through our unit, like over 99% of the time, it'll give you the same result. Okay. So as long as the sampling was done correctly, there's so many other sort of potential places for error in the process but we're hoping to remove one of them.
Okay. So where do you see this being commercialized or being used in the industry? Is this farmers going to have something like this in their shop, or is this more at the elevator in the grain industry side of things?
Yeah, I would love to see it in every place where people want to understand the grade of their grain, but I suspect that the use case for a farmer might be in a farm that's capable of doing some blending, if they can understand what is in one area of their storage and wants to improve the quality of a particular bin, they could do some upblending. Initially, though, I expect that it'll be found in grain elevators where, during harvest you have to process hundreds of samples a day, and we can do it in 2 minutes as opposed to a human grader that might take 9 or 10 minutes. And so I don't know that we'll necessarily replace graders. We'll just augment their skills, and they won't have to look for all of the factors. They could look for the ones that our unit doesn't do as well and focus on those instead of the ones that we can sort of tear out in a minute. We see it as a tool, not necessarily a replacement.
Yeah, augmenting, like you said. Yeah.
Augmenting is an excellent word for that.
Okay. So
this is very interesting technology to me. I think we're going to see more and more of this element come into play where, but there's two sides to it, right? Where we complain about the human error and the human judgment, and that leads to a lack of consistency. And then when we go full, like over to the other end of the pendulum, we're like, if only a computer could do this, then we're going to be like, there needs to be more of a human element to it, right? But it's very, very interesting technology. And I see this having much more of, this is just one example. We're going to see computer technology, AI, for example, really, really play a part. Think about it. The strike zone in baseball, having the exact same discussion. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much for listening to RealAg on the weekend. Make sure you check out realagriculture.com. You've been listening to 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
I like getting back to the basics, and I know that you do too. We can do that with the Sask Soil Health Conference coming up February 13th to 14th at Prairieland Park in Saskatoon. Learn from knowledgeable speakers, take in a producer panel, and network with your peers in this informative 2-day event. Learn more at sasksoil.ca/soil health conference. I had a chance to catch up with Dr. James Tansey. He's entomologist with the Government of Saskatchewan. Of course, we are talking grasshoppers. Here's what he says about the upcoming year's forecast.
I'm going to defer to some of the modeling that was done by Owen Olfert and Ross Weiss and others with Ag Canada. And really, that's what I'm deferring to. And I mean, really, some of the great work that's gone on grasshoppers since really the 1870s. I mean, it's been the focus of a lot of research for a lot of years. So my inclination, looking at the seasonal forecast, which is suggesting elevated temperatures through February, March, April, and the likelihood of little in the way of snowpack contributing to spring moisture. This coupled with excellent conditions for egg laying last summer, and the modeling associated with that, suggesting the overposition index was greatly elevated over what we saw in for climate normals, that there's a lot of eggs in the soil, and the conditions are conducive to them having achieved a state of development where they're going to overwinter successfully. So they need to get to a certain level of embryonic development. And this varies by species. So with migratory grasshopper, which is one of our major pests, it needs to get to 80% development before it can, successfully enter diapause and survive the winter well. Clearwing only needs to get to 50%, but this means that migratory is going to come up earlier than clearwing, usually by about a couple of weeks. So they had conditions that were very good for egg laying, conditions that were very good for embryonic development, so really good temperatures without a lot of moisture. So these, I suspect that the indications right now are that there are a lot of eggs in the ground, and with the warm temperatures that seem to be coming right now. Of course, we saw a very early hatch last year. We saw two-striped grasshopper nymphs hatching in late April in some parts of the province, which is exceptional. But as you know, overall, they were about 2 weeks early. I suspect if the warm conditions continue, we could see something similar. Large numbers of grasshoppers coming up early.
When you say exceptional, I want to put to that exceptionally bad.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Now,
that is we'll say a conservative view of things. I don't want to be alarmist, of course, but I do have concerns about the upcoming season.
Fair, very fair. The cold snap that we just went through, where it felt like we were living in the coldest place possible on the planet for about a week to 10 days. We had temperatures, dipping in, like Alberta was like minus 55 with the wind chill.
Yeah.
Does that have any effect on any of this, or is that it doesn't matter?
It could. Yeah, it could. And I mean, the reason being is that they are very cold hardy as eggs. So, if we're looking at migratory grasshopper, they can take minus 15 degrees Celsius for, relatively sustained periods of time. They suffer mortality associated with that, but they can take it. When, we're talking about clearwing grasshopper, mid minus 20s, they can take that for, I don't want to say an indefinite period of time, but they can take it for a long period of time. And the thing to consider with that is that's ambient exposure. So taking those eggs and just exposing them without the protections that they normally have to those temperatures. Of course, they lay their eggs 2 to 4 centimeters down in the soil, so they're going to get some heat regulation, from the moisture in the soil, from the soils themselves, plus the depth that's going to protect them. In addition, they're in a hardened egg case, so that's going to protect them somewhat, both from temperature extremes and from predators. And if there was snow, that will insulate them from severe fluctuations in temperature. That said, in a number of parts of the province, of course, we had a day or two of really severe cold before the snow arrived. So there's, there is the possibility that we could see some mortality of grasshopper eggs. I think, though, that, and again, just being conservative here, given what the oviposition index indicated and the temperatures that were conducive to embryonic development, I suspect that, even if there was mortality of grasshopper eggs, I think there's enough in the soil where it's still going to be pretty serious. I'll be happy if I'm found to be wrong on that, but but I suspect we're still looking at grasshopper pressures.
Well, I don't really want to bet against you, Jim, but I hope you are wrong. But this is reality too, right? We got to deal with it, and we got to do everything we can from a proactive standpoint in our crop production plans. I'm curious. We can't have recency bias, right? Where we're like, oh, this is the worst I've ever seen it, and I alluded to that at the beginning. I had a producer tell me that this week. Can you give us some context of that? This situation we're in now, what this has been like the past couple of years, and what we're potentially looking at in 24. Where are these populations relative to where we've been in past history?
Well, I think if we're looking at past major grasshopper outbreaks, I mean, we had one in the early 2000s. 1988, of course, 1961. Multiple outbreaks in the 1930s, and of course 1874 to 1875. I mean, will this rank along with those? Still uncertain. What we saw this past year, I think it was a significant outbreak year. But as far as these really major historic events, I think we're approaching those, but I don't think we're there yet. Obviously, I do have concerns about that. One of the things that was documented, especially in outbreaks in the 1930s, and let me just put an asterisk on that too. Is we're talking about in the 1930s that was primarily migratory grasshopper that was causing the major issues. We're looking at two-stripe grasshopper causing most of the issues here, which is a larger grasshopper, so it eats proportionately more. They can engage in migratory behavior, but this change in species dominance, is interesting, and I don't quite have an explanation for it. However, I think we can look at some of the conditions that contributed to migratory grasshopper behavior, and some of the behaviors and outbreaks and look at that as analogous to what we might see, but. Getting back to that, in the 1930s, there were major migratory events. So from sources in the Dakotas, these animals were flying roughly 100 kilometers a day and settling in large numbers. Work their way from the Dakotas. They tend to like to fly, into winds. So that actually limits their movement somewhat, though still 100 kilometers a day was documented. So into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, caused a lot of problems in southern portions of those provinces. But those populations also work their way all the way down into Texas. So, I mean, the propensity for migratory grasshopper to travel great distances is there. And, it comes pre-baked in those populations. There's going to be a proportion of each population that's predisposed for those long distance migrations. That said, two-stripe grasshopper also engages in migratory behavior, and clear-winged grasshopper also engages in migratory behavior in different parts of its range. So we could see these long-distance migrations with these animals as well. So it just furthers concern, because I think our neighbors to the south have also got substantial grasshopper populations, and their risk maps are also looking slightly alarming. So, the propensity for these animals to move and the proximity of these populations could mean we could see animals washing in from the south. So.
That was Dr. James Tansey, entomologist with the Government of Saskatchewan. Not great news. Not great. Jim could have come with better news, but we got to keep it real here. We got to get the information so that we know what we're up against for the growing season ahead. Hopefully, like I said in the interview, I hope Jim's wrong. That's what I'm cheering for. But you know what? An expert like that, chances are he is not wrong. So prepare for the 24 season, having lots of grasshoppers again. When we come back here on RealAg on the Weekend, we're going to talk about automated grain grading. What does that look like? You're listening to RealAg on the Weekend, 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.